So yeah, I'm Frédéric Wang from Gaia. And for those who attended the MathML session yesterday, I briefly mentioned that I implemented an initial thing for font family math. And while I was working on this task, I realized that the current implementation is not really great for font family. So I decided to try to address some of these issues. So the idea of this breakout session is that I'll do a quick presentation, trying to summarize the situation and accomplishment. It will be about 10 minutes, and then we'll start a brainstorming session where we can discuss about what we can do next to improve font family support in Chromium. So as usual, if you want to participate to the discussion, you can click the join with audio, share audio and video button at the top right corner. You can also write in the chat. Okay, so let's start with this presentation. Yeah, so as you know, Blink is a fork of WebKit, which means that we inherited generic font family names from the CSS font model. But also that we inherited proprietary behavior for proprietary WebKit prefix values. For example, we have this internal WebKit standard and WebKit body values that are used for the default and fallback system font. Also 10 years ago, Apple implemented this WebKit pictograph that is still in Chromium. And it was essentially used for customizing the font for emojis. Then we have, the same behavior as WebKit, which is to convert each generic family name into a prefix version. So for example, monospace will become WebKit monospace. So it does that internally, and the consequence of this is that one can actually directly specify this WebKit prefix and get the same special behavior. And finally, we also implemented new values. So we have this proprietary value called Blink Max system font, which I guess has a self-descriptive name. And we also implemented this system UI value, which is from the level 4 of the CSS font model. And one of the goals of this was to replace Blink Max system font and all other kind of proprietary names that are used for system fonts. However, we have not really been very successful so far on this. And we also have new values that maybe we want to implement that are from the level 4 of the specification again. So, for example, emoji for emoji fonts, math for math font, function for Chinese writing system. And we have other values, these UI dash values, which are used to try to match the system UI. And for the Chromium project, ideally, we want to get rid of all these proprietary features and try to follow the spec and implement new generic families. Internally, we also want to avoid all this code redundancy and inconsistency about how we handle these font families. And of course, we want to do that without breaking the web. However, we have to be very careful when we do that. So the reason for this is that, well, essentially this font family stuff is exposed everywhere. So of course for text rendering, but also for CSS parsing and serialization, or for font family property, as well as add font face CSS rule. It's also used for other JavaScript APIs, like the CSS style declaration or the other Canvas APIs. Another thing that we have to take into account is when we want to implement new values, we have to decide what it actually means to support generic family. Currently, we essentially have two approaches. One is just to read the font from the user preference. which is what we typically do on non-Android platforms. Or we can also have some kind of clever selection of available fonts. So we can, for example, have check which font has specific characters that are necessary for some languages, or try to find a font that have a specific open type table. For example, this is what we would typically need for a font family math, where we would like to have the math table for doing math layout. So as I was saying at the beginning, because I needed to implement font family math, I spent some effort trying to improve the font family implementation in Chromium. So as you can see, I submitted a lot of CLs. And I'm not going to provide the details, but the summary is that so I implemented very basic support for font family math. I also added a couple of counters and tried to refine existing one in order to see if we can try to unship these proprietary features. Regarding the one that is dash WebKit dash generic family, we actually checked the HTTP archive, and the usage was already really low. And as I said, this was really an internal thing, and probably it was just an implementation mistake. So we decided to remove this. But in general, we try to be very careful when to check this code, as I said, and I try to learn the CLs very slowly. And actually, I was surprised I didn't receive any notification for regression until 1 month later, where we had this regression on Android related to serif, the default serif font. So, at the end, we had to tweak a bit the original patch, and we were able to keep the same behavior. And finally, another thing that I was really eager to check was the result of the new counters. So for this matrix, we essentially have two places where we can place the counter. Either during the style builder, where font family string is parsed and converted into an internal linked list structure, or also it can be in the font selector, when Blink tries to convert a specific generic name into a more concrete family name. The second approach is more accurate than the first, and the first is itself more accurate than just checking pattern matching on HTTP archive data. So let's take a look a bit at the result. So for Blink Max system font, the result was a bit disappointing. We'll still have high percentage, 3%. And even I think I saw some recent discussion that apparently people still want to keep the system UI, still want to keep this Blink Max system font because the system UI replacement that we proposed was not really covering the need. Then we have this WebKit pictograph. So this one is much better. So the result is actually 10 times smaller than what we approximate with the HTTP archive analysis. So I think it was last week we got approval from API owner to unship this value. And my coding experience student, Sonia Singla, is actually working on it, and I think she already has a patch for that. Then we have this WebKit standard. So again, the result is 10 times smaller than what we measured with HTTP archive. And so that looks good. Asymmetric the intent to unship. I think there were some discussions, so I don't know, maybe we can discuss about this later, whether we want to do this or not. I also have an experimental patch for this, and it seems to work for now. Then finally, we have this WebKit body. So this one is a bit more complicated. So in order to be safe, I actually put the counters in two places. one is in the font builder, and the result is still relatively large. And we got then another one in the font selector, which has quite an unexpected result. I think basically the counter is wrong because I didn't investigate yet, but I think I'm also measuring the initial value essentially of our family. So probably this thing is wrong, and we need to fix it in order to get better measurement. Okay, so I think that's basically all for me. I'm providing a few references, especially the first link is the design doc, which contains a lot of details, as well as known bugs and other proposals. And you have other links that you can check. And that's it for me. So I guess we can start a discussion. I'm going to close. No, yeah, maybe I can keep this. Oh no, yeah, I'm going to stop then. Yeah, so I don't know if someone has a question. Feel free to join the audio video or write in the chat. Okay, so Brian has a question about how we will look into the counter issue. Yeah, of course, that's really wrong. So as I said, I think what we're measuring is basically the initial value. So as long as no one is modifying the default font family, it will be measured, which probably happens in a lot of pages. And so I sent this. I proposed to Sonia to look into this. I don't know if Sonia, you want to comment on this, or if you have done some investigation already. But yeah. Okay, so Sonia commented on the chat that she hasn't found anything right now on the issues that Brian was mentioning. I don't know if anyone else has a question. Otherwise, I guess we can stop and continue the discussion offline. Okay, so Brian is asking, so font family math, I don't think it's in Gecko now. I think I only implemented this very basic support in Chromium, which basically just hardcode, converts font family math into Latin modern math. So it's just an hard-coded string. And in Gecko, we already have some logic in Gecko in order to customize the font, but it's not actually using this font family math. It's using a different approach based on the language, on a fake lang equal math. About WebKit, Brian is asking on the chat about WebKit. No, I don't think we have any update on WebKit. Maybe we should talk again with Apple people and so on. But I guess one of the ideas was that Sonia would start working on this font family stuff, and maybe she can consider font family math. Okay, so Brian is asking for font family math. So, any other question? Okay, so I guess we can stop this session. So thank you, everybody, and we can talk later. Bye.